Okay. Hi, Tracey. This is our
Hi.
first meeting, and we're recording essentially from the get-go, which I actually really love. It's totally authentic. First time we've ever met, and we crossed paths on LinkedIn because you reached out, and we just noticed our stories were very similar. And
Mm-hmm.
of course, you work for AOPS. I'm a huge fan of art of problem solving,
Yep.
and so that immediately suggested to me that I should get to know you. And then just became apparent that we got started in this work. For similar reasons, an oldest son who changed our lives forever. And you were willing and gracious to share your story on this little podcast that I keep tucked away on a corner of YouTube for parents who have intelligent, intense kids and are looking to understand them better and to show up as the best possible parents that they can, which
Mm-hmm.
also includes very often working with school districts, which you have done. So everybody meet Tracey Hosey, who has not only the academic credentials to do this work and now actually is working in this space with AOPS, but has really rolled up her sleeves to get busy finding solutions and collaborating with schools to build programs. And that's what really I really found in your bio that really resonated with me is, it's not enough to notice the disparity between what the school can offer and what the kids need. It's really important and imperative that parents be willing to close that gap themselves and recognize themselves as actually the child's first and most beloved teacher. And a lot of parents today are feeling like they don't have the expertise, they don't have the language, they don't have the training, they don't really know. They have so many questions and they are so fearful of doing the wrong thing
Mm-hmm.
that it starts a cascade of what I am seeing as kind of an expert orientation. And starting a lot of testing, which gives comfort to some, and it gives the appropriate paperwork to go get the resources that the kids need. But it also sets up a potential self-concept of not being enough for the kids, and that's why I wanted to bring you on today, Tracey, to just introduce yourself a little bit in your own words and your own story, but share with parents what you've been doing to roll up your sleeves and meet your kids where they were, and also kids in the community, because in building programs, you serve not only your own son, but
Mm-hmm.
many others. So
Yeah.
I would just love to hear from you about that. And my listeners haven't really heard my whole story, but that is absolutely what I did too, is get in there. And, by getting to know and getting on the ground experience, that's how we develop empathy too for what teachers are grappling with, which is, we'll get into this, I'm sure, but classrooms full of 30 kids with needs all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
Like 12 grades of experience is possible
Mm-hmm.
in one first grade classroom.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you. Thank you for showing up today and for having this conversation.
Thank you. You know what? I'm really excited. Our life's journey has taken us down a path where I had two options, and I'm sure you did too. It was stay uninformed and be fearful of the unknown, or decide, and this is what I did, decide that I was not going to be a problem admirer. I knew there was a problem, I knew there were issues, but what I thought instead was, I have no idea what I'm doing. Uh, I don't, but I did know that in front of me was my son who was suffering and was not successful in a school setting, and I knew there was a problem, but I didn't even know how to identify that problem. Just to kind of give your listeners a little context. So I was a stay-at-home mom. I had 4 children. My oldest was Adam, and at the time that Adam entered public school, he was 5 years old. I had the opportunity to be a substitute teacher. My husband had a work schedule that allowed me to go in and I could work kind of at my leisure. And then, like I said, Adam was 5 and we had 4 children. He was the oldest. So I really didn't know anything more than what was going on within my house.
Mhm.
Um, the things that my son was doing, actually, it turns out the things that my daughter was doing, I just thought that that was normal. I didn't realize they were any different than any other child that we would associate with. You're probably most likely at that point play dates, or as he was 5, I think we were into baseball and soccer. But really it would be more interactions that were just for other purposes. When I went into the school to be a substitute teacher, I believe that I was driven to his room. There was a reason I was placed in there. I
So
don't
you
know.
substituted in his classroom.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, interesting.
Yep. And that was when I started having questions, because what I realized was, oh my gosh, these kids are learning number recognition, letter recognition, sounds. And I knew that on my kitchen table was a report on the solar system that Adam had written on his Nana's old word processor.
Hmm.
And it was actually quite in depth. And he was 5. To me, though, when he did it, I was like, it was nothing. It was nothing out of the ordinary.
So he had typed it away on a word processor. Yeah. For those who don't know what that is, what is that?
It's like it's a updated version of a typewriter. And it's before the computer.
I think I had that in college, right?
You probably
like that.
did.
Yeah. Like blue screen, white writing, and that's all it did.
Yeah.
A little bit of paragraph formatting.
Yep.
So he was typing.
Yep. And I didn't even know that was unusual. So at that time in his life, a lot happened. A lot of revelations happened to me at 5 years old. One was I didn't even know Adam could read prior to this. I would read with my kids just all the time. We just always had books. They were always engaged. He loved just to sit either next to me or right at my feet, and we'd all sit in a circle, all those kids. And I would read. We would go to the doctor's office, and my kids always just had books, or I don't know, there was no rationale behind it. It was just a high interest in books, and it kept the kids occupied.
Yeah.
Now, I will also say this was when I made this discovery, it was 1995. So I believe that we got our first computer, compact Presario, probably right around that time. So there wasn't, electronic devices. So you brought drawing and paper and pencils and books with you everywhere you went.
Yeah.
So I didn't realize Adam was reading with me, because he never expressed that to me. So we were driving down the road, and we were on our way to Nana's, and his sisters had all fallen asleep, and Adam started reading the billboards to me on the interstate. And I was like, son, I said, when did you start to read? And he was like, I don't know. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So then I was asking him, can you read this? Can you read that? And I was like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. Same thing with math. We were on our way to a fair. Seems like a lot of things happened in the car.
Right.
Probably because everyone was contained and the girls would fall asleep and it was quiet. He and I could have conversations. And I was working on a recipe. We were on our way to a local fair, and I needed to double it. And when I started talking about, the ingredients, he started doubling it. I'm like, son, I'm like, oh my goodness, when did you start to do math? And he's like, I don't know. So I came home that night, and my husband stayed with the kids while I went to the grocery store. We all know taking 4 children, 5 and under, to the grocery store is no fun. And I had mentioned to Jim, that's my husband, hey, I think Adam can do math. And then I came home to a legal pad that there was just lots of math problems on. And my husband said, Adam did all of these, except he said, this one, he said, I just had to show him once, and he did all of these. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. What's really interesting is I'd never heard the word gifted, talented, high ability. So I didn't know what this was. I just knew that he was unique. And then when I saw him in an educational setting, I was like, I had that voice inside of me that says, I don't know, this doesn't feel right. And I started talking to the teacher who didn't know anything about gifted. I met with the principal. She didn't know anything about gifted. I say that loosely because I didn't know the word gifted either. I didn't know about it. everyone was telling me, oh, you know what, Mrs. Hosey, he is fine. He doesn't have any behaviors in the classroom. He seems like he's doing good. And they weren't saying that to negate him. They truly did not understand what they had in front of them, which is a common problem for our gifted high ability kiddos, is they are often misunderstood.
Yeah, they're internalizing, right, the situation and the environment. At least some of the kids do. My older son came home from school, and all of that frustration and that staying quiet and that not being intellectually fed and nothing going on and having to bottle that all up, it exploded when he came home. But to the school, they don't really see that there's any problem. You know, they're doing okay. Is that a similar situation?
Yeah, you know what? Anna was pretty easy at that particular point, but it all came to a head. And for your listeners that are resonating or being able to connect with us, I want you to understand that you have power. You are the most powerful person in a room when you're discussing advocating for your child. You may not feel it. You may suffer from imposter syndrome, you know, that you don't really have the answer. You're kind of in the unknown, but you trust your instinct. You know your child. Also, within school walls, sometimes parents can get a bad rap, and they don't mean to have that happen. There is such a giant misunderstanding of this population.
Yeah.
Sometimes I would hear, oh, you know what? Parents just think their kids are so smart. Parents really, they don't see their kids. They just think that they're, really intellectual. Parents, you do know your child. Now, there is truth to that. You haven't seen your child most likely in an academic setting. Perhaps you haven't seen, your son or daughter with peers of the same age within a school setting. So I am going to tell you there are considerations to be made, but be the advocate and don't be fearful, because no matter the outcome, you have to be the voice for your child.
That is, I hope I don't get choked up here, but those 2 points are very important. I think parents really discount how much they actually do know by intuition and instinct. And may feel like, especially for parents of a firstborn, like you said, they don't really know what they don't know. Unless you're an educator, and even educators who haven't got any specific training in giftedness or understand what's going on under the hood, as it were, they really don't understand. And that leads to the number 2 point that you made, that giant misunderstanding of the needs of the gifted person. And you're talking about your son Adam is probably highly profoundly gifted, which leads me to another question for you. That's something that we are actually not able to talk about here in Virginia Beach, is the variation within the gifted community. And I think something as an epidemiologist that really strikes me is there's more variation within the top 2% than there is around the entire 68% around the mean. And that's something that seems so simple to me because I'm used to working with distribution curves, but it's not something that's intuitive to other people necessarily, school boards who are making policies, principals. How would you suggest articulating that or putting that into one's own words?
Well, from a parent perspective, I think the first thing you need to do when you want to advocate for your son or daughter is you need to come prepared. You need to have samples of work that's been done. You need to have, even if it's a baby book that you've recorded milestones on, you need to be able to support with some evidence. So Adam would write poetry, and I would save that. Adam's multiplication legal pad that he did at 5, I saved that. But I also did some of my own investigating on what this term gifted, talented, high ability, profoundly, highly, what do these things mean? And what I want to make sure that your listeners are understanding is there is no common definition. Every state will make their own determination of what is a gifted child.
Mhm.
Within that, within the realm of those performing above the mean, right? There are so many levels of learning, and there are so many diversities within these kids.
Mhm.
So, a child that is performing, first of all, as a parent, I think I want to step in and say if you've had testing done, understand that the 99th percentile really doesn't tell you much. All that tells you is that that top of that test, your child performed. It does not indicate that is your child's level of learning. It means that the capabilities of that measure were not able to go beyond that. So
Mhm.
your child is at the 99th percentile, but that is a very broad continuum of possibilities.
Mhm.
So any of those, just keep that in mind. There is not a test that's going to define your child. There are tests that can give snapshots and build profiles of your child. So what you want to do is you want to be collective. Your child is a whole child,
Mhm.
thinking, feeling, complexities. I always say complex minds, complex issues.
Mhm.
There's very few things in life that are standard as far as a protocol to meet the need of someone. You could think about medicines, right? Might work for this one, might not work for that one.
Mhm.
There's side effects. Some people get them, some people don't. Some people will get something unique. So it's important to keep in mind the individualness of these children, and for parents to have the correct starting point.
Mhm.
And you don't have to have the answers. Your goal is to become a problem solver with the group that you need to solve this with, and understand that schools don't always have that. You said in Virginia Beach, you can't have that conversation. So know what your state says, know what your district says, because they're all going to be unique. And those don't have to be gates. I
Mhm.
don't like the word gate program, gifted and talented education. I do like gifted and talented education, but I don't like that the acronym is a gate, because it
Mhm.
sounds to me like I am closing this opportunity because guess what? According to my measurement, you did not qualify. So I'm going to close it and now I'll open it for somebody else, when the complexities within these children are quite profound.
It's so true. And I think on the topic of testing, I think parents should also know that the screening tests that are given to groups
Mhm,
are pretty fallible.
mhm,
They reliability year over year with the same child is at best 80%, which is not really great given
mhm,
that it's the same child, the same test.
mhm,
Would the findings really be replicated a year later? No, I mean, if anything, you would think they'd be even more likely to be found gifted the next year, but that reliability. And then we have validity, and we have sensitivity and specificity. I'm used to that in the scientific realm when you're running, like, say, a Pap smear or some other test, right?
yeah,
We
yeah,
don't have that in gifted. I mean, we really
mm-mm,
don't have any kind of gold standard. And if we want to talk about gold standards, and this is out of my lane, I'm really not an expert in psychometric testing, because I didn't really go down that road. Are the WISC and the others, right? The Iowa
mhm,
ITBS. There
mhm,
are probably half a dozen really well recognized gifted tests. But from what I've learned from psychometricians is that the group screeners are really not that good. So the things that the schools typically use in second or third grade to identify gifted kids are they should not be used to exclude kids.
mhm,
And very often they do because they're
mhm.
doing this first pass.
Yeah.
But I can say I know and have talked to many, many parents over my more than a decade of advocacy where the kids did not pop on a group screener. In fact, they could have gotten 12th percentile on a group
Mhm.
screener. And by the end of high school, these same kids are, halfway through college
Yep.
and are have gifts like you alluded to, multiple different gifts. Gardner talks about multiple intelligences. We miss a lot of kids who don't pop on, say, standard intellectual tests, but have tons of intensity, tons of athleticism, leadership capacity, artistic ability, creativity. Those things, I think, are the kids with those kinds of capacities
Mm-hmm.
are typically missed, in my experience, again, not a psychometrician, but they're typically missed on the group screeners because they're really looking for problem solving and intellectual ability and working memory and things like that. And if
Mm-hmm.
the kid isn't really interested, not really their thing, they're
Yeah.
not into the test that day, they're not even going to try the question. So one thing parents could do, I know I'm kind of going off in different directions, but one thing parents could do is when they look at their group screener, just look at how many questions were even attempted,
Yeah.
right?
Agreed.
As just a starting point.
Yep.
Because if they weren't even attempted, then I mean, automatically we're dropping right out of the denominator like half the questions. And so
Mm-hmm.
how valid is that test actually?
Mm-hmm.
So where does that leave us, Tracey, as far as conversation? So testing is not the one size fits all. It's not a perfect indicator. And
Right.
you were saying that the parent knows, they know their child, they really do have some power. Come prepared with the
Mm-hmm.
samples. I completely agree. I have like folders that are this big for each kid all the way through. I mean, everything, because I would do kind of like your husband. I did my own work with the kids, trying to bolus dose them, to use a medical term. Like 45 minutes once a week was enough to give them something.
Mm-hmm.
And then I gave them their own work to replace the work that was in the classroom. I
Yeah.
gave that and worked with the teacher and replaced that work. So
Yeah.
then I kept samples of, here's what first grade teacher did. We had this arrangement. She stamped it with a sticker. I didn't ask her to grade it because it's like not in her usual milieu. It would be asking too much for her to grade it. But I said, just so he can feel like the other kids, can you just stamp it or put a sticker on? I'll do the grading. I promise you, I'll do the grading because I care. I will be that mother who will do the grading. But how did you approach from kindergarten? Put yourself back there in
Okay.
kindergarten. You're seeing the disparity. You went to the principal. Like, what started to shake loose? What did you start to do, and how did things evolve?
Okay. So after I went to the teacher, after I went to the principal, and I really didn't get any answers, but I didn't have any answers myself. I just kept wondering. I just was curious. And I let things go for a while. And then I have educators that are in my family. So I was reaching out to educators. So keep in mind, at this point, I have a degree in criminal justice. I have a degree in public affairs. I do not have a degree in education.
Not yet.
Nope. So as I'm talking with other educators, no one is using the word gifted. No one seems to have an understanding of my son. And I had to walk a kind of a fine line because it almost was taken as though I was bragging. And I was not. I often felt like I was on the coattails of my son, holding on to him while he went off and explored these topics that had so much interest and motivation to him.
Mm-hmm.
So by second grade, what happened, that was the straw that broke my camel's back. So by second grade, he was in a double classroom, and the teachers were saying, oh, the nice messages, Adam is such a great kid. Adam is doing really well in school. And then I got a note one day that says, Adam, he's so funny. He alphabetized all the books in our classroom. Now, there was a ton of books. These were seasoned teachers that had had years of collecting materials. And my son was tired of trying to find what he wanted. So he had spent his time organizing this double classroom library into alphabetical order so that he could find it. I went into his classroom, and they had stations. Well, I learned you had to be careful with that, because if teachers see your child as a capable learner, not creating any problems, they don't really check in on them. It's a problem to this day. Often you will hear within schools that teachers don't have as much time to devote to their kiddos that are already performing beyond the norm. Now they want to. So again, I'm not setting the stage for a teacher problem. This is a universal education problem, and it isn't just in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
It is a problem for understanding what to do with these kids. About halfway through second grade, Adam had a very tumultuous experience. And to anyone else, they're going to think, oh my gosh, he is just way overreacting. Well, they do have a lot of sensitivities and overexcitabilities.
Mhm.
So, winter, he's at school. He put his coat and his boots on backwards, and they're lining up to go out to recess. And the teacher, for whatever reason, we're human, right? So we all have bad days, we all have good days, we just have days. This upset the teacher because Adam was not following the rules and he was being silly and she needed to get the kids outside. So he had to spend recess against the wall. So when he came in, fine, but I had the same experience you did when your son walked in to your door. My son came in, I want to say 3:30 in the afternoon, and he had taken the bus, got home, and he started crying from the moment he walked into my door.
Mm.
And he did not stop crying at 9:30 at night. We were on my bed and I was crying because I didn't know how to help him.
Mm.
And what I kept saying to him was, son, what is the matter? Son. And he said, Mom, don't you get it? Don't you get it? And I said, what? And he said, I didn't know that was wrong. If I didn't know that was wrong, how am I going to know whatever I decide to do, that's not going to be wrong and get into trouble? So he took it in a much broader sense.
Yeah,
And
that
then,
makes total sense, right? How could he possibly live comfortably if anything could be wrong and get
right.
punished?
Yep. Now, I will say at that time, he is in second grade. So Adam is what, 7 years old. As a man, now he would, he would lead a coup. He would do many things. Like he's
Yeah,
like, oh, no, no, no. But at that time, that was devastating.
yeah.
So he quit answering questions. Like you would say, Adam, did you have a good day at school? And he would say, maybe yes, maybe no. Ask me again another time,
Mm.
because he covered all his bases. So
Mhm. Mhm.
maybe there were parts of the day he enjoyed. But if he said yes, that he liked it, what if there were parts that he didn't enjoy?
Mhm.
Then he's lying.
Mhm.
So he became very evasive. Went to his Boy Scout meetings. I was asking his, Cub Scout leader, like, tell me, do you see this in Adam? Is he interacting? Is he talking? Is he answering questions? And they said, you know what? He's doing the same thing here. He just tells us, yeah, maybe yes, maybe no. And I had my husband then go in at lunch. And at that time, we could get into schools a lot more
Yeah.
freely. So he went and had lunch with them. And I said, I want you to tell me what you see. And he saw the same thing. So that was when I set up a meeting with a child psychologist and wanted to talk about Adam and know, how do I help him? One of the characteristics of our gifted thinkers can be black and white thinking. They
Mhm.
can have creative solutions to creative problem solving, but they can still be quite linear and black and white in their thinking. So I knew then that my goal was I had to teach my son how to operate in the gray. If I
Mhm.
wanted him to be a successful human being, and I think I had mentioned that to you, that to me, success was not measured by the job he held,
Mhm.
the school he went to, or the title he had. I knew that he was at risk. So I knew him becoming captain of his own ship. It's how I raised all of our children, my husband and I did, where our goal was to teach them to understand themselves so that they could make choices and wind up in the life they want to live, not
Mhm.
wind up somewhere in the river of life. So many people were like, yeah, I did this because I didn't know to do anything different, or I didn't know what I wanted and I did this. They just wound up somewhere.
Mhm. You
So
are so wise to be able to do that. And you had a total of 4 kids at that time, or 5? 4?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So to be able to, um, have the wisdom to have your husband go in and and see and look in multiple settings and see if it was happening in multiple settings, and to be really curious about what's going on. And I love how you went to the child psychologist to get some insight on, what's happening here, and just to get more information. It
Mhm.
sounds like one of the things I worry about parents today is therapy culture has become so commonplace that a parent might be tempted to outsource the situation to a therapist and drop the child off at therapy and have all that work done in therapy. But it sounds like you took that insight back home
Mhm.
and worked on it within the framework of the family and you as the parent, which I think is a really wonderful example. Did you have the therapist talk to Adam, or did you just go in and explain what you saw?
The first meeting was my husband and I. We went in and talked, but I should correct my words. It isn't the first meeting, it was the only meeting.
Mm,
And the reason was when I met with this psychologist who was highly recommended, he did not know anything about gifted. He
mhm,
didn't know the term. He didn't know when I was talking about Adam, he was just like really shaking his head and really very interested, but didn't have the tools or the
mhm,
training himself. And I understood that my kid was different. My kid was different. And
mhm,
the reason I did all of that was because I was scared as a parent. I did not understand why. I did not understand him. He did not understand him. No one understood him. So it felt to me that if I was going to do anything about this, then it was going to be dependent on my husband and I looking into options and just understanding. You had mentioned the whole child,
mhm,
my whole kid. I needed everything about him so that I understood asynchronous development.
mhm,
Right? I understood that sometimes he was, it could be, oh gosh, any of his ages. He could be 8, and he would talk about such high level concepts because when he was interested in a topic, he went into depth and complexity until at his age, he really couldn't learn anymore. And then the next day would literally wake up to a different topic.
mm,
So, what I knew was that I had to help my child. And there's nothing more motivating to a parent than a suffering child.
yeah.
So, I decided to, after leaving that child psychologist's office, that was it. That was it. I said, you know what? I don't know what this is. I don't know what to do about it, but I'm definitely going to start learning. So
Mm,
I wrote to like the boards of education just to see what state boards said. What was curriculum? I wasn't a teacher. I'm like, what is this? What is standards? Like, what is it that we're teaching kids? Then I contacted Dr. Renzulli. I contacted Karen Carnes for educational law. I contacted Nicholas Colangelo at the Belinda Blank Institute,
mm,
and I started learning about these experts. The beauty of them was that every single person that I reached out to responded.
mm,
So I started learning. I started reading the research. I started finding blogs, like whatever I could do to educate myself so I could lead the charge.
mm,
What I learned though, as life teaches us all along the way, is that hold on a minute. There are so many levels of giftedness. There's so many children out there. And I remember reading a paper at that time from the National Association for Gifted Children. And I believe they said there were this was their best guess,
mhm,
5 million students that were sitting in classrooms that were not really getting the services that they needed. And I thought, 5 million. And those would be really undocumented numbers. Like, how many kids are not engaged? How many kids
mm.
are not being brought into the educational process, but are hamsters on a wheel?
Right.
This is what I want you to do. And parents and teachers thinking about grading, because grading means in a particular lesson, unit, paper, whatever that was, that child gave you what you were asking for. If they got a 100,
Yeah.
did it mean that it actually measured growth and learning? It didn't.
Right.
Unless you knew where that child was when they entered a lesson and could see the growth after they left a lesson, that could be actual measured growth. Other than that, they performed a task, whether they wanted to, whether they didn't want to, motivations, complexities. Then you get into these kids and you find out about things like intensities, overexcitabilities. I loved when I read Dabrowski's theory of overexcitabilities. I actually gave that to every one of my kids and my husband.
Me too. I did the same thing.
And I wanted to know, do you see yourself in here?
Yes.
I see you in there. Do you
Yeah.
see you in there?
It's so true. I mapped all of us, and it was really actually very helpful because things that I don't know if in your family you have some introverted, very private, very reserved people. In my family, I do, and I have some people who are much more gregarious. It really gave me a sense of where we have common ground, like the sensual, the appreciation for beauty, right, or
Yep.
art, for experiences. But then the intellectual, you
Yeah.
know, things that might be more apparent, the love of learning and grappling with something or even debating and arguing. It just gave me a totally different perspective on who we were as a family. So instead of seeing things as friction or separation, I
Mhm,
realized it was quiet overlap. There were
mhm,
quiet areas of true overlap where
mhm,
we might be doing different things, but
mhm.
we're enjoying and resonating with the same sort of intensity.
Yep, it's true. But gaining that knowledge and that insight for themselves, but, they were younger and there was a lot going on, and my husband, he just thought it was interesting. I'm like, "Oh my god, you are all over this place." But as the person that was going to take charge of this future, it helped me to understand, the social emotional impacts of children, of high ability, gifted kids. And it helped me to think through my own children. And as I was paving a path, I was bringing along with it not only the research and the work I was doing, but the life I was living. So
Mhm.
it was coming full circle. Now, what about Stephanie Tolan? Did you ever read Is It a Cheetah?
That doesn't ring a bell.
Oh man, I will send that to you.
Okay.
So that is a powerful metaphor. I actually went to see her speak in person. Again, this was a long time ago. My son, I don't know, probably 96, 97, maybe. Um, but it's a metaphor about a cheetah. So it's called Is It a Cheetah? And it talks about the characteristics of a cheetah, but it actually correlates that to the classroom.
Mm.
Because if we are not feeding
Mhm.
our children what they need and we're giving them zoo chow, then how do we really know what their potential is?
Right.
And so when you think about the complexities of these kids, and I think about um, underachievement, right?
Yeah.
Which can fall into a couple categories. My son eventually became what I like to call a selective consumer.
Mhm.
Did you ever hear of Dr. Jim Delisle?
Yes, I think so.
So he and I became friends. I brought him to my school district because I believed in the work that he did. And he was talking to me about the selective consumer. And as I was talking to him, I'm like, explain that to me more. He says those are children that choose to engage or disengage
Mhm.
based on the work you're asking them to do.
Right.
And he said it really kind of falls into number one, do they have a relationship with the teacher? Do they
Mhm.
respect and honor that teacher? Does that teacher respect and honor them as
Yep.
learners?
Yep.
And then it gets into the grades. And my son, by the time he graduated high school, he was like, I would say in the middle of the pack for his GPA because he was not grade motivated. He could
Right.
have,
Same with mine.
yep. If you were
Didn't
asking,
care.
no,
No,
mm-mm,
he didn't even think he needed a GED. He's like, I
no,
don't need that to do what I want to do. And
yep,
like, imagine the horror of a person with a master's degree and like being raised on you feed yourself with a college degree. I'm like, wait, What?
Uh-huh.
He's
Yep.
right, though. He's right.
Yep.
He didn't need it. The rest of the world needs it. He
Yeah.
didn't. He taught himself everything. He taught himself actually all the way through school.
Yep.
Everything. We just lined up classes with what he was already teaching himself. So if
Mhm.
it was linear algebra that he needed to do the work that he was passionate about, well, he could go do the linear algebra class. What that meant was he attended a college class. There were 4 like videos, 4 tests,
Mhm.
which is great. No homework, 4 tests. He wouldn't study at all, wouldn't even watch the videos because he had already taught himself. Take the test and be fine. But I had to tell the school, I'm like, this is actually what works for him. He's an autodidact. He doesn't actually like school. He loves learning, but he doesn't like school. When I finally realized that,
Mhm.
it helped me understand there's nothing wrong with my child. There's nothing wrong with him. He
Yeah.
loves learning. There's
Mhm.
nothing wrong with him.
Mhm.
But
Yep.
you feel like there's something wrong if a student with that kind of mind doesn't buy into the linearness of school and the grades and the validation of the grades. Mine didn't care at all.
Yep. You know what you're talking about, in my opinion, is the date of manufacture, right?
Mm,
The date your child was born determines most often when they enter school, what level they enter
right,
school at, and how they progress through school.
right,
It's date of manufacture. It's not honoring and understanding the abilities of that child.
right.
And how do you ever measure the loss of a sonnet that's never written, a problem that's never solved? Because if they are not given that opportunity, then it's hard to measure loss, right? Because
It is.
it didn't happen. So with Adam, what I always thought was so interesting is there he is graduating middle of the pack for high school. Now I will tell your readers that I did work with my school district and I developed the first ever acceleration policy and program.
Mm,
So when Adam, let me think about this, when he was 9, he was doing 7th and 8th grade work. And I sent him actually to the middle school. So what happened was I learned that number 1, the teacher determines the weather.
mm.
So if teachers did not understand, there was a misconception that you're this so-called gifted student, and if you don't get something right, you shouldn't really be here, right? Where what I learned is that no, those are celebrations, those are parties. That is the opportunity to learn. But I am not blaming anyone. I am not blaming teachers or specific schools. It is a problem in our system.
It is. They really don't understand that, roughly 2% of the kids, according to Johns Hopkins, are 3 or 4 grade levels ahead when they start the year. They just are, and people should be looking out for them. They are in the classroom. They're in school districts. They may be 1 in 10,000, but they're there.
Mhm.
And many of these kids don't really get recognized because they're quietly conforming. They're dealing. They're
Yeah,
struggling. They're
yeah.
they're just taking it on.
Mhm.
And gosh, it sounds like such a terrible word, but coercion gets the job done. They comply. But some of our kids will not
Mhm.
bend to
Yeah.
coercion. They just will not do it
Yep.
because they're value driven and they have such a strong internal sense of authority
Yeah.
um, that, good luck to you if you happen to have one of those kids. Be willing to let one of those kids be your teacher. And
Mhm.
my son changed my life forever. Like I had to learn through him
Mhm.
how things were going to work and come up with contracts and arrangement on post-it notes with him, which
Mhm.
sounds crazy. Who's really in charge here, right? But he knew what he needed from
Mhm.
a very early age. And I was there to be more of a coach than a parent, but I didn't actually realize that until several years down the road. I didn't realize that I needed to go back to school and learn learn the methods to be a coach versus a parent. I tried my best, but I was still operating out of quite a lot of fear and not understanding and
Mhm.
worry about his future because again, he's the firstborn. I didn't know
Mhm.
what I didn't know, and it's hard because
Mhm.
we're also going through the pandemic, our
Mm.
family, and an international move during the pandemic, and so just fear was like in the air and in the water, right?
Mhm.
And parents are still parents with kids today, like right now, who were born during the pandemic, and kids who were teenagers or say middle school through the pandemic are still in a lot of that fear mindset.
Mhm.
But let's go back to your policy. I did something similar with our school district. Our son was he he believes he's probably the most tested kid in that district because we were working with them
Mhm.
to help them have the confidence that it was okay to
Mhm.
accelerate a child who was ready for more,
Mhm.
far beyond what they had done before. And so I encouraged them to sit, the math specialist, sit and watch him work. Just sit there and watch him work and feel free to ask him questions. Don't make it be like a combative thing
Yeah.
where, right? But let's just, enjoy a little time together, and
Mhm.
make it a creative process and see what he's doing. And
Mhm.
then they did end up creating another class for the kids who were ready for more.
Yep.
And they changed their whole schedule to allow for that. Well beyond other school districts, they created an algebra class for sixth graders,
Mhm.
which now, algebra in eighth is considered like somewhat advanced. Algebra in sixth was 10 years ago was a big move for the school districts. I
Huge.
give them a lot of credit for that.
Me too, and I have to say that too. My former school district. So through my journey, I actually went and met with my superintendent, and this was before I had my master's in education, and I focused on gifted. But I went to him, and I want to say at this point, oh gosh, Adam's probably 10 or 11. And I said, I'm going to go back to school. I'm going to get my master's. I'm focusing on gifted. I want to know. Now, at this point, I'd been very active at developing the programs and acceleration as a parent. And I said, I want to know if you will hire me. And he was like, wow, I have never had somebody come ask me for a job before they even had their degree. He's like, but if you get this, he says, I will find a place for you. And I did.
That's amazing.
So, and like you opened the doors and said, hey, you know what? Send a math specialist in to observe my child. I brought Adam to my classes. I would not every class. He was always brought in as a Q&A. If you want to know about a gifted child, Adam, are you willing to do this? Yeah, of course. And I said, okay. So then the teachers were prepared. My other colleagues that were in classes were prepared. And he would just sit up front and sit on a desk and fire away. Ask him any questions that you want. So I knew from the beginning that my goal had to be raising awareness about these children,
Mm.
right? They need to have more involved. And then for us, we ended up getting Northwestern University involved and had some input from them. But when we developed the first ever acceleration, it was with my son. And I remember looking at him and I said, son, this is what we're thinking we're going to try. And I said, I don't know if it's right or wrong. I said, but are you willing to work with me and kind of be the guinea pig? And we will work together because I don't know if it's going to be good or bad.
Mhm.
And I said, are you willing to go on that adventure with me? And he said, yes. So that was important.
Yes, co-creating it and their buy-in is so
Mhm.
important. Their sense of
Yeah.
autonomy and agency seems like to me the number one thing
Yep.
is, do they want to do it?
Hmm. Yep. And all the while, I am understanding more and more and more and experiencing more. So I did go back to school and I did graduate. I did get hired. I was hired as a regular fourth grade classroom teacher for my first year. My second year, I was a fifth grade gifted cluster teacher. By my third year, my district parents were so upset about the lack of programming, and they were going to boards and they were having parent meetings, and the gifted department was created.
Hmm.
So that third year, I had the ability to become a gifted resource teacher. I think I did that for 1 or 2 years, and I became the director of gifted education, which really opened up a lot of opportunities because by that point, I had been involved with my school district for so long that they had developed a relationship with
Mhm.
me that they were willing to let me spearhead these opportunities.
What an incredible story you have, Tracy. Like, seriously incredible.
Yeah,
So
it was
amazing.
I have goosebumps when we talk about this because I think about all these kids that are in our schools. And yes, we have your son and we have my son and we have my daughter, but there are kids or daughters, I should say. There are children that are sitting in schools that are performing beyond the norm. What's happening to them? What's
Yeah.
happening when they're beyond the norm to that bell curve and as it's going
Mhm.
further and further to the right? So all of the strategies are basically the same. You have to figure out what a child knows. You
Yes, you do.
and you have to support them
Yep.
because not only can they be an underachiever, a selective consumer that's like, yeah, I'm not really interested in this. I really don't even care. And I could care less about grades. Or to the underachiever that is so perfectionistic, that's so fearful of a mistake.
Hmm.
Those identities that those kids have can be so detrimental because they can say, oh, wait a minute. I'm supposed to be smart and I don't actually know this answer, or I don't know why this is right. Instead, they have to be taught and cultivated and supported to celebrate and feel comfortable in that unknown. So there are so many complexities, and then twice exceptional children, and there's just a number of possibilities, but they are in those classrooms. They are in all of our schools right now. They are there.
Yep, they're there. And the unfortunate thing is, it seems like gifted education is, and education in general, is moving so slowly toward a
Yeah.
growth mindset and growth measurement. You mentioned growth. You have to measure growth to see if the children's needs are being met. We're not even there here in Virginia Beach. Honestly, the local plan for the gifted is, some 80 pages long,
Mm.
but the evaluation pillar of this entire plan um, has one page. The rest of the sections have multiple pages, multiple objectives. Um, but sadly, the evaluation portion, does this thing even work?
Mm-hmm.
There is a lack of capacity, and I'm not blaming anybody. It's just that's not part of the language. Whereas I come from healthcare, and quality improvement and metrics and stuff is like that's been
Mm-hmm.
around for 2 decades. If education could pick that up a little bit and look at growth measures. Where I came from before, where they did create that sixth grade algebra class, the big breakthrough for us there was growth, 1 year of academic growth for all students. That was a game changer. And what's funny is the parents didn't really realize what an incredible that was a revolutionary goal.
Yeah.
Absolutely revolutionary for every kid to get to have 1 year of growth.
Mm-hmm.
Because what
Yep.
that means is we recognize that they're not all starting in the same place, and
Yep.
that we're going to hold ourselves accountable to growth using the measures that they had there. I am optimistic that we will get there with Virginia Beach, because they are just now recognizing that we do need some data, that maybe we could be looking at growth. The school board has some really great leadership on it now, who appreciates the importance of growth for all students, and
Mm-hmm.
how are we measuring it, and how are we breaking it down by subgroup,
Yep.
economic disadvantage as well, because poverty does affect all of this. There are gifted kids in poverty who have not had access to books,
Yeah.
but are popping as gifted in ways that we need to be vigilant for, that don't show up on tests. They're
Yep.
incredible problem solvers, or storytellers, or
Mm-hmm.
very animated individuals, or leaders out on the playground. So you're right, these kids are everywhere. But in the interest of time, I would love to know, what are you doing for AOPS now, and how did how did that happen?
So I know, because that seems so interesting, right? I have been passionately involved with building programs for children that enrich their lives, that includes from those that are just, needing access to enrichment, to the very highest that need multiple radical acceleration opportunities with an understanding of who they are. But I brought Beast Academy, Art of Problem Solving, to my district in 2015. And when I saw the math that they were doing at an elementary level, starting, I'd started my kiddos first grade, and I saw those graphic novels and I saw
Yeah.
the complexities and the conceptual understanding. My kids were thrilled. I'd never experienced that. We had many core content, and using this as a supplement, uh, the voices of my students, like literally standing up in the middle of a class and hollering like, oh, I get it. I get math. Or looking at some of their growth measurements, or just their actual engagement sitting in groups. I was like, what is this? So as we expanded it more and more, I was like, this is incredible. So eventually, what happened was I was talking with Grayson, who you just adore, and so do I. He was my rep from Beast Academy Art of Problem Solving, and he asked me if I would be interested in joining the team. I had to think about it. This has only been a year and a half.
Okay.
So I had to think about it because I was also on, at the time I was in Illinois. So I was on the board of directors for the Illinois Association for Gifted Children, like you name it, my feet were in it. And I thought, well, let me think about this. There would be no other place that I would ever consider leaving except for something like Art of Problem Solving and Beast Academy. And then I talked with my husband, I talked with my children, and I realized I could become the advocate well beyond my district and my state. I could become the voice that could help understand that we want our kids to have perseverance. How do you do that? Let them struggle. Let them walk away. Teach them how to work through problems. Isn't that what you and I had to do to move forward with our children? It isn't about having the right answer. It's about taking an educated step forward. And sometimes you come back and you take a breath.
Mhm.
So I did it. I did that. I joined, and I never looked back. I want people to understand that there are so many options for their kids. Acceleration is really important. Depth and complexity are really important. So I wanted to make sure that our kids knew that, knew what
So
was
true.
true.
What do you say to those parents? You just mentioned persistence and problem solving and not having the right answer. This comes up so frequently. What did you do in the classroom? What did you do as a parent? What do you recommend now from AOP's perspective to help kids with that whole notion of productive problem solving or
Mhm,
productive struggle, grit?
mhm,
How do you
mhm.
encourage that? Like, what is the little step that a parent should take?
I think the first thing you understand is that none of us have the answers to everything ever. And our children are a work in progress. As grown-ups, we are a work in progress. So if they don't understand something, allow them to say that out loud. Allow them to authentically say, I'm not sure what to do. And don't feel worried. Like as a parent, particularly when we have these very able kids, that
Mhm.
we can think, you know what? Oh, but you should know how to do that. Or why don't you know how to do that?
Mm,
Don't worry about that. If you give the, I guess, the permission for them to be in an unknown situation, the comfort level grows for the
mhm,
parents and for the kids. Same with teachers. Like we want the kids to actually be in places where they don't have all the answers, but it can't be climbing a mountain. It can't be so high that they cannot get to that. It has to be a scaffolded process.
mhm,
So they start with what they don't know, and with help, tools, resources, they begin to understand, oh, okay, I got that. And they start connecting. And
mhm,
then when they have another problem, they're not so fearful. They don't have an identity that says, I'm smart, so I have to have everything right. I am used to getting 100%. I am used to completing things quickly. I am used to going on and doing something that I want to do because I've done everything else that
mhm,
needs to be done.
mhm.
So
I
that's
think
it.
that's a really good point because I was just reflecting back on, my stumbles as a parent, and I think it's very easy for us to unintentionally get genuinely confused,
Yep.
but have that create discomfort in the child. Like for instance, all of these things made sense to the child, but somehow we come to something that they don't understand, and we can actually be genuinely confused. Like, I don't get that. But what
Mhm.
that might say to the child is it's a problem that
Mhm.
you don't understand it. And we don't
Yes.
mean to say that. We don't mean to say that. We're just like, whoops, whoa, that caught me by surprise because there's all this other stuff. But what you're saying is be careful of what you're communicating to the child and
Yep.
and make the unknown almost like you said before a celebration. Like, oh, that's great.
Yeah.
here's something that we can actually tackle and wrestle together.
And I think one other thing I'd like to point out is understand that within the mindset of our own children, often they have that perspective of themselves anyway. You may not have done anything. It is just part of their journey often. And so the way they manifest and what they show us as an outcome of that particular social emotional sense of self, sometimes it's no work. Sometimes it's tears. Sometimes it is painstakingly working through something like high stakes testing, where it's intended to adapt to failure. But if they are not comfortable in that, my poor kids would have so much stress and anxiety because they thought they needed to have it all answered correctly.
Whereas the adaptive test is it's actually trying to find what they don't know. So it's the whole test is going to feel like that.
Yep.
Yeah, that's such a good point. MAP is like that, NWEA's MAP, which our school district just got, which is a very powerful tool for parents. You know, it puts some information in their pockets about where their child is, and then they can go take that and they can align it with readiness to learn. So we should put in a plug for AOPS. AOPS has bricks and mortar locations. AOPS also has, in addition to Beast Academy, also has English, language arts.
They have that on their academies. So their brick and mortar schools and their virtual academies, we have that available, and they definitely have that for online learning. And like I said, brick and mortar. And then Beast Academy is amazing. It is for the elementary student. You want to think about kindergarten through probably 6th grade. And then Art of Problem Solving has high level materials that start at about like I would say a 6th, 7th grade level, but those are standards according to a school. It's pre-algebra. It's introduction to algebra, introduction to geometry, high levels of work that believe that cultivating mathematical thinkers comes from solving lots of problems and that struggle. We believe in that. But the reason Beast Academy was even created is because parents were saying, schools were saying, students were like, but wait a minute, I didn't know any of this. So starting early to get kids involved in that kind of learning to help with what we're talking about, that growth mindset, that perseverance, that productive struggle, uncomfortable in the unknown. When the earlier we can bring that to kids, the better off they are.
100% agree. And making it a joint exploration, like you did so many things with your son, you know, like co-creating things with him. And will you try this with me? Will you experiment with this? You know, be the guinea pig. I think Beast Academy is wonderful for that, because my own brain got to work out using that with my children and the neighborhood kids. And it is in, if parents want to get off screens, at least last I checked, it was still in hardcover. So you can still use the workbooks and the guides. There is a guide for teachers and parents, and then there's a workbook for the kids, but it's also available online. And I think parents should also know, this is a question I often get, is the upper grade material is credited. So you should be able to get high school credit from your school district for your child. I do know school districts that have done that.
Yes.
And school districts that have denied it. And I know that both outcomes have happened in the same school district, which is not fair. But it is accredited by WASC as an honors program. It is Common Core aligned, then some. So it goes beyond Common Core, and it's phenomenal. AOPS has saved our bacon multiple times with kids who are just not having it at school. Like, school has no value, and then use AOPS as a curriculum replacement. And you go circling all the way back to parents have more power than you think. I don't know why I feel like closing with this, but because the parent is such a crucial teacher and knows the child best, if parents have kids in, K through 8, honestly, grades don't really matter. They matter to the kid as far as self-concept, like we've talked about. They matter to teachers, understandably, because we want kids to work. But truthfully, if the content at school doesn't match the child's readiness, replace it. Just replace it. Because what we don't want is a student who does not see themselves as a math person, or is afraid of the unknown, is afraid of that productive struggle. What's most important is your child is a whole child and able to handle, able to tolerate, and actually seek challenge. That's what we really want in today's world. Problem solving is the name of the game, because we don't know what's in the next 5 years. We have to be good problem solvers, and that's what AOPS really excels at.
I agree. And it just falls into the mission and the vision of cultivating and growing our students to be these thinkers that we know they can be, but giving them opportunities. So, and I will say one more thing, Beast Academy and Art of Problem Solving it is used by the homeschool population. It is quite popular there, but it's also in the school situation. So in that setting, everything from private schools, public schools, charter schools, you name it, it's being used there too. So its diversity mathematically is profound. So I just love that it's reaching and teaching so many students. And don't be afraid to, go check it out. beastacademy.com, artofproblemsolving.com. Check it out.
And look for you.
Yeah.
I'm going to send it right to you to go talk about it, because you're an educator and a parent, and
Yes.
you understand how important it is right now to have this. And I would say, especially after the pandemic,
Yep.
really eviscerated, public education for many kids. It's putting teachers in a terribly difficult catch-up situation for half their classroom, and then feeling guilty. I know good teachers feel guilty that they don't have something to
Yes.
give to the kids, and it's not their fault. They just don't have it. So teachers, if you happen to listen to this and you've got summertime and anyone in your administration is willing to listen, recommend that you be able to bring Beast Academy into your classroom for your group instruction,
Yeah.
or some other way of small group teaching, because I also know it's good for remediation. The new buzzword for remediation is acceleration, actually.
You know what? It is fantastic. It isn't quality materials, quality learning. Look, I'm getting all excited because it reaches and teaches from a high perspective, but it also can be brought in to fill those gaps. The important thing is you just have to match that child's level of learning. So perhaps you have a sixth grader that actually would benefit from level 2. Then the gaps get filled with enrichment through a dialogue and through the experience of Beast Academy as an intervention tool. Like, it is very powerful.
It really is. We could go on and on, couldn't we,
I know.
Tracey? Well, I'm so thankful that you, and thank you to Adam too, for being a great guinea pig, and also for being able to, I'm sure that he knows that you share some of his story here, and we wish him the very best. It would be great if Adam were ever willing to come on and talk to our young people, to continue his journey of sharing his story and answering questions. It would be great to have him on sometime, because I think the young people really appreciate hearing from people who understand very well the journey, right? And they're in their own words, and see what's coming on the other end of the tunnel. That's always reassuring and rewarding. Parents often ask me, so what is it like to have an older, gifted student? And I only really know my family's experience. So it's always lovely to make connections like you, to just be able to find what's common and provide support and reassurance. And, for all those parents to know that they're not alone. And
oh, shoot.
That's okay. The television.
I went out. Let me see if I can locate it.
Such a cute picture you have there.
Okay, here we go. Oh, there. Am I on or no?
You're on. You're on.
Okay.
Just look down a tiny bit because the camera is down. So if you look down.
Yep. I'm going to fix that right now. How's that?
Perfect. Okay. Perfect. All right. Send us off, Tracey.
Okay. You know what? I don't even know what to say other than I love your children. I love you as parents, and my entire existence has been to help you to make the most of your child, whether you're in school or in a public school setting or not. I would love if some point we could talk about acceleration.
Yes.
I have accelerated hundreds of students, so I can talk about what that process is like and how successful it has been.
That would be perfect. Let's come back to that, because that is the most underutilized tool that there is, and it's so cost effective, is what I've been trying to say. Like, you don't have to create anything. Nothing. So let's do that. We'll come back to this.
Okay.
Tracey, thanks a million.
Thank you. It was great to chat with you.